Hi, you're listening to On Israel, Al Monitor's podcast from Tel Aviv. I'm Ben Caspit. The same hand that set fire to the explosive Israeli front with Iran is now trying to put out the flames. Israel has been signaling in recent days that it would not retaliate against the attack attributed to Iran on an Israeli-owned merchant vessel, the third such attack this year. The Iranians began attacking Israeli cargo ships some 2 months ago, right after the New York Times revealed that Israel had attacked and caused grave damage to dozens of vessels smuggling Iranian oil or weapons for Hezbollah and other terror groups over the past 3 years. The gradual escalation with Iran came to a head with 3 operations in recent days, all attributed to Israel. The powerful strategic explosion at the uranium enrichment facility in Natanz, the sabotage to the Revolutionary Guards Commando and Intelligence Collection ship in the Red Sea, and an aerial strike, which has become almost routine on a Damascus suburb warehouse full of weapons for Nasrallah. Whether deliberately or by some cosmic coincidence, this escalation was happening even as negotiations began in Vienna on a U.S. return to the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran and on Iranian compliance with the deal, and as Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was holding his first working visit to Israel. The moves attributed to Israel are making Washington and other capitals nervous. They fear the Israelis, feeling abandoned by the Biden administration in its campaign against Iran, have decided to rain on the international parade taking place in Vienna. After all, Prime Minister Netanyahu himself said Israel would not be bound by agreements that the powers reach with Iran. It also seems that the intimate dialogue with the new administration that Israel had been expecting in hopes of winning over the Americans is not really taking off. Now that it no longer has Donald Trump at its side, has Israel really decided to take on the entire world without the backing of the President of the United States? Did Netanyahu not learn anything from his failure to stop President Obama from signing the agreement with Iran? Is Netanyahu trying to manufacture an emergency so he can convince reluctant political allies to save him by joining his government? And last but hardly least, how long will the Biden administration put up with this behavior? We will put these questions to one of the most knowledgeable experts on relations between Washington, Jerusalem, Tehran, and other regional capitals, Reserve Colonel Udi Evental, who is currently a senior fellow at the IDC Institute for Policy and Strategy. Evental served in various defense posts for 25 years. He was head of strategic planning at the Political, Military and Policy Bureau of the Defense Ministry, assistant to the military secretary of the Prime Ministers, intelligence attaché in Washington and elsewhere. He also had various positions within the IDF's intelligence and planning directorates. Colonel Evental has monitored, researched, and analyzed anything and everything in this arena. He joins us right after this short break.
If you're listening to this podcast, you obviously care about the Middle East, and if you do, you should probably be reading Al Monitor. Al Monitor is a global newsroom headquartered in Washington, D.C., with a network of over 160 contributors around the world. Al Monitor offers first-class reporting and analysis from a range of perspectives and an approach that represents the highest journalistic standards, as well as an award-winning commitment to press freedom and independence. If you haven't done so already, visit us at almonitor.com, check out our articles, and sign up for our free newsletters. There's a lot to choose from, including the Week in Review, an essay that offers unusual insights and forecasts into the region based upon Al Monitor's outstanding reporting. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe to our Al Monitor podcast on your favorite podcast platform, on Israel with Ben Caspit, and on the Middle East with me, Andrew Parasolidi.
Now I have the pleasure to say hello to Colonel Udi Evental. Shalom, Udi. How are you doing?
I'm good, Ben. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So let's dive into business, and I'll start and ask you. You have described Israel's strategic dilemma. Should it clash publicly with the Biden administration on Iran? I'm sorry, as it did with the Obama White House, or try to exert influence from within? Do you think Israel has made its choice?
The answer is yes, actually, but it's tricky because if you look at the declaration, especially and the actions of Israel, then the answer is positive, especially if Israel is behind the attack against the Natanz facility and against this IRGC vessel, Saviz, like the Iranian accuse Israel, and according to foreign and local leaks and in media outlets. But even if Israel is not behind these operations, you look at the declaration, and the Prime Minister said during the Holocaust Day that Israel will not be bound by the agreement. And the Chief of Staff, a few weeks ago, the Chief of Staff, he said he was against, of course, he was also against going back to the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. And he was also signaling that Israel is preparing some military options. Now, the problem is that this policy is not the result or the product of a proper decision-making process in Israel. Under this political crisis in the last 2 years, I mean, the cabinet was not convened for a few months now. No options were presented to decision makers, to the government and the cabinet. No consequences of those options were discussed. And this is a strategic matter. How do you, your policy vis-a-vis the United States and Biden's policy, it's a strategic matter, and no discussion was held. Now,
and
this is problematic.
You did not mention the relationship between the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense. They hardly speak with each other, the Gantz and Netanyahu. And still, you're actually hinting that it's a one-man's decision and no one took heard second opinion or something.
Yes, and I think the problem is that it's a pattern in the last year. You take the decision to go for annexation. You take the decision to authorize or to accept, to turn a blind eye to the authorization to sell the F-35 to the UAE. And even recently, all the relationship with Jordan and the decisions that were taken, I mean, Jordan is a strategic ally. And it was not thoroughly discussed, not even initially discussed. And this is a problematic pattern. And we need to remember that a confrontation policy vis-a-vis the United States, Biden administration in its policy on returning to the JCPOA has a price tag. I mean, it could influence negatively on the relationship between the two countries as a whole, at a point where Israel is in a deep crisis and need American support in every front, vis-a-vis the ICC, the military threat that we are facing, to enhance the normalization process, etc., etc. And of course, if you go against, we saw in Vienna what's going on in Vienna, Vienna. I mean, the international community there is a consensus on going back to the JCPOA. And if you confront the American policy, you are going to be isolated, and you might turn the Iranian nuclear problem into an Israeli problem and not an international one.
Okay, but still, I want as a follow-up question to ask you. We heard that an Israeli delegation, very distinguished one, with the Chief of Staff Aviv Kochavi, Head of Mossad Yossi Cohen, Head of Military Intelligence Tamir Haiman, all generals, will go to Washington, trying to find some attention and to convince the American colleagues that returning just like that to the old nuclear agreement is bad. You think there is no chance, or did we miss the train already?
Yeah, I think we are not going to influence the American decision to go back to the nuclear deal, to the JCPOA, even though there are some reports that there are some disagreements also inside the American administration on this question. But I think the decision has been made in Washington, and they are very adamant to go through, and they will go an extra mile, and they will soften their positions like they have done recently in order to get to the objective of returning to the JCPOA as a first stage. And I think we will not be able to make them deviate from this plan. And not only because this administration is manned by the architects all the architects of the original nuclear deal. This is not the main reason. The main reason is that the United States has chosen this because of strategic American interest. We have to understand that. I mean, Iran is not top priority for the Biden administration. They want, like National Security Advisor Sullivan says, they want to put it back into the box and turn into
China,
much
etc.
more.
Yes.
Yes, much more urgent and much higher priority challenges.
And we will not be able, you're saying, to convince them that the urgency is a lot more than they think. And I want to ask you on this, maybe to go into details, you mentioned it before. What's your take on the so-called controlled escalation versus Iran, which is not looking very controlled in light of the series of attacks of Iranian targets just as talks began in Vienna and US Defense Secretary was visiting Israel? If Israel was indeed behind these attacks, do you think the timing was deliberate?
Okay, about controlled escalation, it's very clear that both Israel and Iran don't want to be dragged into a full-blown escalation between each other. And every side understands that the other side doesn't want to go all the way. Now, this is a classic recipe for miscalculation because both sides are willing to take risk. And I think this is things can go out of hand very easily. Now, I think the writing is also on the wall. I mean, you and I will not, and I mean, Israelis will not be surprised if there is an attack from Iraq or Yemen, a missile attack or drone attacks from Yemen or Iraq against Israel, because we have been warned that this is a potential eventuality. Same goes to an attack against one of our embassies or Jewish institutions around the world. So, I mean, the writing is on the wall and things can escalate, even if both sides don't want them to escalate.
What we call miscalculation.
About the timing of the attack, I mean, this is very difficult to say if the timing of the attack was connected to the talks in Vienna. I mean, it was also, I remind you, it was also Nuclear National Day in Iran. And there can be many operational considerations, but whoever executed this operation must have taken into consideration that it could come across, and I think it did, as a deliberate action to derail the talks in Vienna.
Colonel Evental, what is your take on the declaration of the Iranians that are starting to enrich uranium to 60%, which is very close to the target of 90% if you want to produce a nuclear bomb? Although experts says that the explosion in Natanz actually paralyzed their ability to enrich uranium in Natanz, but they still have 1,000 centrifuges in COM. So, is it strategic? Is it? Do you worry about this 60% issue, or it's just a declaration, an empty one?
I don't think it's an empty declaration. Actually, they already notified that they have accumulated few grams already. They are accumulating few grams, and they do enrich the 60% in one of the above ground facilities in Natanz. I mean, there is no. I mean, the main step towards weapon-grade uranium, which is 90%, is going from 3.5% to 20%. This is a major move. And then to 60%, and then to 90%. The 60% level gives you, it shortened the breakout time to achieve enough fissile material for a bomb, but you have to accumulate, and when it comes to accumulation, this is nothing, and also 20%, they have more than a year to accumulate enough 20% for a bomb. So, I mean, it's not very urgent. The meaning of this move is mainly symbolic. This is a line in the sand that we are willing to move forward if our demands are not accepted. We will move forward. I mean, the symbolic effect at this point, the symbolic effect of 60% is much more significant than the technical significance.
I understand. Do you think there is what's your chance from following it from here? What's that, in your opinion, the chances of signing the New Deal, the old New Deal, reaching an agreement between the United States and the powers and Iran right now, as it looks from Vienna?
I think the chances are not negligible. And I think there is a common strategic interest between Biden and Khamenei. Biden, like we said, wants to go and deal with other issues, more burning issues. I mean, the struggle against China is, they see it as an historical struggle on the global order and on the American way of life, etc. And of course, the dominance of the democratic system. This is an historical struggle, and they want to go back. This is the American interest. So they want to put, like we said, Iran on the side and turn and pivot towards China and Asia. And the Iranians, they want very badly to remove the sanctions. I mean, the sanctions are a real burden. And even though there is some positive signs in the Iranian economy, it is very far. Like, I mean, the IMF said that they are going to have a growth of 2.5% this year, but this is not very significant. There is another wave of corona, a very devastating wave right now as we speak in Iran. The poverty line is around 50%, and so on and so forth. Inflation almost 40% according to IMF. And they want badly to remove the sanctions. They have some breathing room still, but so it might take time, and it might happen after the elections in Iran in June. But I think the chances are not bad. Of course, it's a very complicated issue. There is the issue of the sequence. There is a potential for escalation in the region, that there is the Arab and the Arabs in Israel that are opposing, also some opposition in Congress. And of course, the issues are not very easy, because the issue of R&D and on the advanced centrifuge, they gained a lot of know-how. What do you do with the know-how? How do you roll it back? So the issues are not simple, but I think the two sides they look to me pretty determined to achieve the goal of returning to the JCPOA. So the chances are good.
Talking about the JCPOA, do you think that the situation right now is better or worse than it was under the JCPOA, which distanced Iran from a bomb, but was also full of holes, including the sunset clause? Is there any chance of squeezing strategic concessions from Iran, such as a significant extension of the lifetime of the nuclear agreement and the expansion of maybe to include missiles?
Okay, I think the answers to these questions are not definitive yet. I mean, the jury is still out and the bag is mixed. On the one hand, if you ask if our situation is better, I mean, in 2018, May 2018, before Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, the Iranians were the breakout time of Iran for fissile material for a bomb was around 1 year. Now it's between 3 to 4 months. So in this we moved back, or we moved backwards. But on the other hand, you have a very significant sanction leverage vis-a-vis Iran that we didn't have in 2018. I think it influenced the ability of Iran to support terror organizations around the region. So it's another gain. But I think that if the Biden administration goes back and doesn't succeed to strengthen and prolong the JCPOA like they promised, then we are going to lose the know-how. I mentioned earlier the know-how of advanced centrifuge R&D. And maybe some other issues like uranium metal, etc., some more know-how that they gained, and I think we are going to lose that comparing to 2018. And then if we go back to the JCPOA, we are going to meet in around 6-7 years. We are going to meet again the problem of the potential of Iran becoming a threshold nuclear state with international legitimacy in more 7 years. But the good news is that we will have some time to prepare ourselves to this changing reality. So
Yes.
like I said, it is maybe too early to say what our situation. It's a mixed bag.
I want to go back to the controlled escalation, so-called, and to ask you, to what extent do you think Iran would be willing to take the risk of an open and more violent conflict with Israel if the attacks continue? Can the Iranians afford such a front when their real strategic target is getting rid of the sanctions?
I think the answer is the Iranians are willing to take a risk to a large extent. The only thing is that an open and direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, this is not the Iranian modus operandi. They are not going to go in this direction. They have many assets around the region, and they have their proxies, that they arm them, they build up their force, and they know how to operate with some deniability, plausible deniability, and so it will not be open and direct, but it will be indirect, and it will be difficult to find Iranian fingerprints. And I think what we are experiencing these days demonstrate their willingness to take risks. They are negotiating relief of sanctions in Vienna. And at the same time, they have increased their attacks against Saudi Arabia, against the American from Yemen, against the American in Iraq, and against Israel. So they know how to walk and chew gum at the same time, and they are willing to take risks. And they mitigate the risk with a modus operandi of proxy attacks and plausible deniability.
They're very, very good chess players and also bazaar masters. To what extent do you think can Iran's military nuclear capability be blocked or delayed by a shadow war such as the sabotage at Natanz? As you obviously know, I guess you've been in the military in those days, Israeli intelligence predicted in 2001 that Iran would reach breakout capability within 4 years. It's been 20 years and Iran is not yet there. Can the delay be attributed to Israel efforts, and how much longer can Iran's nuclear ambitions be delayed like this?
Okay, I mean, the shadow war is not a silver bullet. This is only one tool in the toolbox. This is only one tool in a campaign that is composed that includes other tools, military tools, political tools, economic tools, and of course operational and gray zone operations. All those should be synchronized in order to achieve the effect. The shadow war by itself is not going to be the medicine to the Iranian nuclear problem. And I think the Iranian, if the United States, this is not the case right now, I think, but if the United States succeed with maintaining a credible military threat towards Iran, I think Iranian ambition could be delayed for a long time, ambition for a bomb. Okay, the second issue is the predictions that you mentioned. And I think there is, when we talk about predictions, there is a confusion between worst case scenario. This is the number of years and months that we hear are a success-based scenario and worst case scenario. And the reality is different. Of course, the likely scenarios are different, but we don't hear about them. And about the achievements, Israeli achievements vis-a-vis Iran, I think we have along the years, again, it's a mixed bag. We have had many achievements vis-a-vis Iran and delaying its nuclear program. I think two of our main achievements are first to persuade the international community that Iran is after the bomb, that the Iranian program is a military one in the end. And I think with the archive that was stolen from Tehran is the final proof to this allegation. And I think the world has been persuaded. And also we succeeded in turning the Iranian nuclear threat into an international problem. So, and we have many other achievements. But so this is one, but on the other hand, when you look at the last 2 decades, last 20 years, you discover that the trend is very negative because in 2005, in 2003, Iran frozen its nuclear program. It didn't have enrichment or conversion, etc., of uranium. And now they have a relatively robust enrichment program with international legitimacy. So the trend is, and the same goes to the region. If you look at the region in 2003, I mean, the Iranians were very deterred. They were under siege. They felt they were under siege.
It was right after the American invasion to Iraq, and this was the only time.
They had the American in Iraq. They had the American in Iraq on the one side. They had, in the east, they had the American in Afghanistan, and in the south, they had the American in the Gulf, the carriers, etc. And they felt under siege, and they were very deterred. When we look at the Iranians these days, they are using a strategy of a siege towards Israel, towards Saudi Arabia. They are harassing the Americans across the region.
And you have a Shiite axe from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, etc. But I want to touch a more strategic question because, as you know, for 2 decades, at least 2 decades, there was an internal debate within the Israeli security establishment between two different, totally different approaches. One said that we have to fight this Iranian nuclear race with all the means, shadow, not shadow, but we cannot afford it and we have to stop it, etc. And the other camp said that you cannot block Iran for good. Iran is a superpower. It's close to 100 million people with infrastructure and science. And as you said, the know-how. The solution is to change the regime. If you change the regime, the problem is solved. Where do you stand between these two opinions?
Yeah, I will begin with the bottom line. I don't think regime change as a strategy is an effective strategy, and I'll explain why. Because when this regime, the Iranian regime, is going to understand, they suspect already, okay, and when they are going to be positive that the international community or the United States is after a regime change, it will strengthen their determination to have the bomb as a policy insurance for their survival. So they will become much more determined and adamant to obtain the nuclear weapon. This is one. Second, you cannot forecast or predict when this kind of a strategy is going to bear fruit, is going to topple the regime. I mean, the regime in Iran is a stable regime, they have a lot of capabilities to oppress opposition, to crash any sign of opposition. We saw many demonstrations in recent years. And what do you do in the meantime if they go forward with the nuclear? It doesn't give an answer to the nuclear problem. And third, when you look historically in the region, there are in this kind, you don't know the end, you cannot predict the outcome of such an effort. First of all, you cannot be sure that it will succeed. And if it succeeds, you cannot predict what kind of a regime will follow the current regime. In the Iranian case, it can be a more radical regime. And you look around we are talking about Afghanistan now, 20 years for the invasion, the American, for 20 years for 9/11, okay? Mm-hmm. And after 20 years, I mean, the regime change was done. A lot of, immense efforts and resources were invested, and probably the Taliban will come back to power after the Americans are going to leave. So you really cannot plan for a long time on a regime change strategy, I think. I think it's not an effective strategy.
Okay, my last question, Colonel Evental, is that various assessments are being heard recently from different sources, including one by former CIA Director James Woosley, that the US is underestimating the threat level from Iran. According to Woosley, Iran already has the capability and components to put together a nuclear bomb. Do you believe he is right? And can we be sure, with all the resources of Israeli very good intelligence and CIA and the Western world, that we know exactly what they have and what they don't?
I'm glad you asked this question, because it has become very trendy also in Israel to say that Iran is already a nuclear threshold state, and upon decision they can rush very, very quickly and obtain the nuclear weapon capability. And I think Woolsey and others, they confuse between breakout time, we discussed it, they confuse between breakout time for fissile material, which is 3 to 4 months. I mean, the fissile material is this 35 kilograms of 90% enriched uranium. So this is 3 to 4 months, but this is not the bomb. I mean, the bomb, you have to take this fissile material to design
put it on a missile, yes.
First to design it into a nuclear device, and to put the nuclear device on the tip of a missile. And I'm counting on the Israeli assessment, the Israeli Defense Intelligence assessment that was shared with a military correspondent only recently. And according to our intelligence, it is going to take the Iranian 2 years from decision. Now, I also want to, we discuss it also, that reality is tough. I mean, to take such a decision is not an easy decision for the Iranian, because it could entail an attack against their infrastructure, and nuclear infrastructure. So I think I think we still have time, and the Iranian nuclear capability can be delayed for a long time.
But I cannot ask you, I cannot hold from asking you another question, because you spoke about an attack. And before you mentioned the American military option, that I'm not seeing the Americans using it or mentioning it or threatening.
Yes.
But do you think an Israeli attack is still on the table?
I mean, Israeli attack is not relevant right now. And I'll tell you why. Because, I mean, according to all assessments, an attack, a full-scale attack against the Iranian infrastructure will gain maybe in a good, in a successful base scenario, it will give Israel or the international community up to 5 years at the most. And I mean, if you go back now to the nuclear deal, this is what you get. You get 7 years, more or less, until the sunset clauses.
So you're saying you have it for free. Why go to war?
I don't see any logic right now for any attack. If you can go to the nuclear deal, and what do you attack? You will get that not for free. I mean, there are some costs and prices involved in coming back to the JCPOA, but the cost and the implications of a full-scale military attack are also very, very high. So I think for the time being, we have time to plan. We have time for planning in this respect.
Colonel Udi Evental, it was very interesting. I thank you very much for joining us here in On Israel. תודה רבה, Udi. We'll be right back after this short break.
I'm Andrew Parasolidi, president of the award-winning media news site El Monitor, where we cover the Middle East with some of the best reporters and columnists anywhere. And I'm excited to announce our new podcast, On the Middle East, where each week I will interview newsmakers from the U.S. and the region about the latest news and trends with additional commentary from our on-the-ground correspondents. Those of you who follow the region know that what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. And to cite another great movie line, every time the U.S. tries to get out, the region pulls us back. Your time is valuable, so let me promise you this. You will learn something and you will never be bored, because each week we'll be talking with and listening to those leaders who are making the news and shaping the trends in this critical and fascinating region. So please subscribe to On the Middle East with me, Andrew Parasolidi.
Thank you for staying with us. Colonel Evental fears the possibility that Israel will find itself isolated once again if it decides to once again clash with a sitting American president. Such a move, he warns, will have a heavy price tag, a devastating effect on Israel-US relationship, and will probably push the Iranian nuclear danger from an international crisis to an Israeli problem. Colonel Evental thinks that Israel have probably already decided to try to ruin or sabotage the renewed American effort towards a nuclear agreement, and he thinks this move was not done or decided after a proper or due process in cabinet or other professional forums. He says that the chances for reaching an agreement between the sides in Vienna are not slim and not neglectable due to the mutual interests of both President Biden and Supreme Leader Khamenei in this goal. Hope you found it interesting. I'll see you here next Monday in On Israel in Al Monitor. I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. Take care.